chance that there's a chance that one misses a lot of what the Gemara has to teach. And it's, again, not a question of information. It's not just a question of missing the information that's there. One can get the information. It's being transformed by the experience of learning. It's being able to access the unbelievable wisdom that every page of Gemara holds within it, and to be able to learn how to do that, how to make it relevant, how to make it meaningful, so that whatever piece of Gemara you're learning, it's something that you can apply in your day-to-day life, right now in our times. And so the Matmonim program, I realized people have very limited time, and that's why I decided just to take one idea from every daf, spend 15 to 20 minutes on it, but go into it in depth and make sure to extract the relevant principles on it. So what I'm going to do with you, I'm going to give you a sample one, and we'll do that in each of the shiurim that we have together. And in fact, the sample one I'm going to give you is a bit of a preview. I'm going to give you a sample of tomorrow's daf. So you'll be ahead if you're on the Daf Yomi program, and if you're not on the Daf Yomi program, you'll definitely be ahead, just by being exposed to one idea from tomorrow's daf. So for those of you who are familiar, of course, we're learning Masechta Kiddushin, which is the Masechta that deals with relationships, and particularly, but not only, with marriage. And as the Gemara is prone to do constantly, there are deviations, and there's a stream of consciousness that takes place that leads us into many different discussions. Today, we're just going to focus on one specific discussion, and to do that, I'm going to share my screen with you. If you just give me one moment, so that you can actually follow the text inside. You should be able to see two texts. Rav Atlas, if you could just give us your hand, can you see a Suras Hadaf of the Gemara and perfect? Okay. So then let's start working on the text here. So I'll show you how I prepare these source sheets, so that if you do join the program at any point, you'll understand what it is. So there's a title. The title has a Hebrew and an English. The English gives you a sense of what the general context of it is, the philosophic context, and the Hebrew is usually from a phrase in the Gemara that we're working on. And I've called this one War and Peace, and you'll see as we get to the end of it why that is. And what we're dealing with here is a very politically incorrect law that we have in the Torah, and that is that a Kohen who has a physical impediment, a Kohen who has a physical blemish, who is physically challenged, cannot serve in the Beit HaMikdash. And I say it's politically incorrect because we're all about equality and challenge people, and it makes no difference if one is challenged or isn't. One should have the same opportunities. But in the Torah, that isn't necessarily so. And the truth is, it's not so in our Western society as well. A typical Jewish man who might be 5'6" or 5'7" would be considered height challenged in the basketball arena, and might not be able to get onto a serious basketball team. And that's not because of discrimination. It's just he doesn't have the right tools. You need height. And as we'll see, a Kohen needs certain tools to be able to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. And if he is physically impeded, he's missing some of those tools. So then I give a very brief summary of what the piece will talk about. And here between the two blue lines, some of the important sources that I'm going to be bringing. And here you'll see that I referenced three gigantic authorities from the 19th century. They all lived at the same time in different parts of the world. Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who you know, who lived in Frankfurt, the Maharil, who was the Rov in Yerushalayim, and the Hamek Dover, who's the Netziv, who lived in Volozhin. So you've got Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and Jerusalem, and we're going to learn something from all of these gigantic figures who spanned most of the 19th century. And we start, let's have a look at the page of Gemara, at the actual page of Gemara. And we're starting down here. That's at this middle length line, at the end of the middle length line. Baal Mum mum de avodato psula minalan. That's the Gemara's question. Where do we know from that a Baal Mum, that's a person who has a physical blemish, his avodah, that the service that he performs in the Beit HaMikdash, if he brings sacrifices or acts in any Kohen capacity there, is pesula. That avodah, that service is disqualified. He's disqualified as a Kohen, and any service that he performs is disqualified. That's the question of the Gemara. Now, the difficulty with that question is that we know that from the Torah, from Parshat Emor. Why is the Gemara asking, how do I know that a Kohen who has physical impediment is not permitted to serve in the temple? If you look on the source sheet now, I bring the psukim from Parshat Emor, where Hashem says, "Ish mizara daber el Aaron lemor, ish mizaracha ledorotam asher yevo mum lo yikrav lakriv lechem elokav." Any man of your descendants, of Aaron's descendants, who has a physical impediment, a mum, lo yikrav, may not draw near lahakriv lechem elokav, to bring a sacrifice. Lechem elokav mikdashei hakadashim. He cannot bring any sacrifices of the holy food. Umina kodshim yochel, but he is allowed to eat. So he's not prejudiced in terms of his rights. His rights as a Kohen are fulfilled. The fact that he has a physical impediment doesn't mean that he doesn't have the right to participate in the consumption of the sacrifice, but he's not entitled to participate in the service of the sacrifice. He may eat, but he may not serve. That's what's important over there. But we see in the psukim that it's very clear that he can't serve. And then you've got the Mishnah in Masechet Zvachim, in the beginning of the 12th parak, which says, Ba'alei mumin, bein ba'alei mumin kfuin, bein ba'alei mumin ovrin. A Baal Mum, somebody who has a physical impediment, whether it's a temporary one or a permanent one, cholkin va'ochlim, they may participate in the eating of the various parts that belong to the Kohanim, to the priests, aval lo makrivin, but they're not permitted to sacrifice because of these verses that we've got in the Torah. So what are we going to do about this? Why is our Gemara in Kiddushin, why is our Gemara asking what the source is for this? If we look at Rashi, you can see where my pointer is. Uval munda avodat top sulaminaran, says Rashi, im avad b'shogeg. What I'm asking is, if a Kohen serves by mistake, so he doesn't realize that he has an impediment, or he forgets about it, and he draws up to the Mizbeach, to the altar, and he brings a korban. De'ilu b'mezid ktiv achela parochid lo yavo. Because if we're talking about where he knowingly participates in the service of the temple, that's covered already. We know that from the verses we've just read. But what our Gemara is concerned about is, where do we know the principle that any sacrifices that he has brought retrospectively are disqualified? So let's think of the situation. We have two situations to consider. A Kohen's working in the Beis HaMikdash, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. He's active, he's bringing korbanot left, right, and center. He then discovers that he's a halal, that he has a yichus problem. He's a descendant of somebody who isn't allowed to be a Kohen. He isn't allowed to act as a Kohen. This has just been discovered now on Thursday. And he asks a question. What about the korbanot he brought on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday? The answer is those korbanot are fine. No problem. We accept them. What is the situation with a mum? If he's a man with an impediment, he didn't realize that this was an impediment that disqualifies him. So he's busy bringing korbanot Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Thursday, he's told that he's got an impediment. He's not allowed to bring korbanot. Then all those korbanot he brought from Sunday to Wednesday, all those korbanot are disqualified. So retrospectively, we disqualify them. Where does that come from, asks the Gemara. What is the source for that? That's what the Gemara is intrigued by. So let us go back to the Gemara. Here we've got the question again. Baal mum da'avodato psula minalan. Where do we know from? Now we understand what the Gemara is saying. I know that a Baal mum cannot go to the Mizbeach and serve. But what happened if he did so unknowingly? Apparently the law is that his korbanot, whatever he served, is disqualified retrospectively. Minalan, where do we learn that from? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel de Amar Kra, Lachein emor hineni noten lo et briti shalom. We learn it from a strange verse. The verse where Hashem says to Moshe to tell Pinchas, after Pinchas has just killed Zimri and Cosby, Hashem says, tell him I'm giving him my covenant of peace. That word shalom has within it shin lamed mem, which means whole, complete. Kishehu shalem v'lo kishehu chaser. We learn from that he is only permitted to serve in the temple if he is shalem, he is complete, and he's not missing anything. So if we look back at the source sheets here, we've got the Gemara quoted, and we've got the posuk here, Lachen emor hinin yaten lo et briti shalom kishehu shalem v'lo kishehu chaser. So I want to look at a few things here. The first thing I want to look at is, it's not really fair. Is it his fault that he's got a mum, he's lost an arm has been amputated, or he's blind in one eye, or he's lame, he was wounded in war? Hopefully we're not going to see any more serious wounds, but even what we have already, and there clearly can be Kohanim among them. A Kohen is wounded in war, he's acting as a hero, he's defending our people, and all of a sudden he's not allowed to bring a korban, he's not allowed to act as a Kohen in the Beit HaMikdash. How fair is that? So there are two people we're going to learn to respond to that. The one is this Maharil Diskin, who, as I said, was the Rov of the Eda Haredit in Yerushalayim in the 19th century, very uncompromising but wonderful human being, an enormous Talmid Chacham, the Maharil Diskin. And the point that he makes is really interesting. He says, the mum, this imperfection in the Kohen, is not the reason that he's disqualified. It is the result of something else that disqualifies him. And the Maharil Diskin says the following: V'nirei lomar da'inyan hu kach d'kein amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'Aaron HaKohen, ish mizaracha ledorotam. Hashem has just told Aaron, your descendants forever will be Kohanim. Ritzon lomar, that means to say, D'kivan da'ata Kohen la'olam, you are now going to be a Kohen forever. For centuries and centuries and millennia to come, your descendants are all going to be Kohanim. They don't have to do anything to qualify. They don't have to write any exams. They don't need any licenses. They're born a descendant from you. They're Kohanim. There could be Kohanim who, for whatever reason, says God, I don't want them to act as Kohanim. It could be issues with their attitudes. It could be issues with their behavior. It could be issues with their parents or grandparents or great-grandparents. Who knows what it is? But there would be people I would want to disqualify. How do I do that? So a physical impediment is God's way of saying, for whatever reason, I don't want this person serving. And we can't understand the reasons. It doesn't even matter what the reasons are. But we're not discriminating against him because he has an imperfection. We accept that the reason that he has an imperfection is for whatever reason Hashem doesn't want him to be serving in that particular service. It's a little bit like we sometimes have these very difficult conversations when a Kohen falls in love with a Gerusha, with a divorcee. And is it fair? And what should he do? And of course, it can be a very difficult and tragic situation. But one of the things we try to explain is, if she's a Grusha and he's a Kohen, that's a sign they're not meant for each other. They might have fallen in love. They might be both wonderful people. But in terms of Hashem's plan for the evolution of history, these two people aren't meant to come together. There's a certain destiny in that. And the Maharil Diskin says the same about a Kohen who has a mum. A Kohen who has a physical blemish and imperfection is not meant to be serving for whatever reason it is. That's the Maharil Diskin's approach. But the one I really want us to focus on is Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. Now, Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch is wonderful in all of his works, as most of you know. But in Sefer Vayikra, he is an obligatory resource. If you want the book of Vayikra to be meaningful and relevant, you can't really manage without Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. And listen to what Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says here, because this is fascinating. Says Hirsch, Mizbeach Hashem lo hukam letzorech shuvurim urutzutzim, ivrim ufsichim, nechim, dvuyim, v'cholim. The altar of Hashem was not set up for broken people, shattered people, blind people, lame people, miserable people, sick people. That's not what it was made for. Lo l'shem kach nivnei hamizbeach. Not for that was the mizbeach built. That's not what for the Beis Hamikdash is about. It's not about attracting all the miserable misfits of society and everybody with a physical impediment. And we can have enormous sympathy for such people, and we can help them and do whatever we can. And they are part of our community in every single way. But that's not what the Beis Hamikdash was created for. Hashem is almost concerned that we'll use the Beis Hamikdash as a hospital to which to go when we're terribly desperate. כדי שהאדם העייף ישתרר למעלותיו וימצא שם ניחומים לאבליו או רפואות פלאים לחוליו. It's not a place for people to go to be healed because they're ill, to find wondrous cures for maladies, to find comfort because they're in mourning. That's not what the Beis Hamikdash is for. כי החיים בשלמותם, because life in its fullness, ברעננותם וגבורתם, יתקדשו שם לחיי מעש של עבודת השם. Hashem wants fit people. Hashem wants athletic people. Hashem wants vital people, healthy people, brilliant people, smart people to go to the Beis Hamikdash and dedicate their lives to the service of God. He doesn't want to attract only the people who have problems, only the people who've got terrible situations, and they come to Judaism, they come to Yiddishkeit as some kind of solace for the terrible life they're living. That's not what it's for. The Beis Hamikdash is not a hospital. The Beis Hamikdash is a gym. It's for people who are fit to get fitter. It's for people who are healthy to get healthier. It's for people who are spiritual to get more spiritual. That's what it's for. V'kach yizku b'virkat Hashem shel ra'ananut nu'urim v'koach chayim. Go to the Beis Hamikdash when you're young and vital. Don't wait until you're old and broken. And when you're young and vital, you go to the Beis Hamikdash and it gives you more vitality and more strength. Hachayim v'agvura lo hamavet v'achulsha shochnim b'mizbeach Hashem. Hashem wants life and strength, not death and weakness, to hang out at the Beis Hamikdash. The people hanging out at the Beis Hamikdash should be people. If you get a picture of this, you would get some of our best-looking young men and women, for that matter, too, of course. People who are fit, people who are strong, people who are wealthy, people who are brilliant. They're at the Beis Hamikdash, not because they've got nothing else to do with their time, not because they're desperately unhappy, not because they're looking for magical cures and brochas, but because in all their vitality, they want to dedicate that vitality of life to God. And he says, we see this when it says in the Torah, Im shamoa tishma lekol Hashem elokecha, v'hayashar be'enav ta'aseh. If you do what Hashem wants you to do, and you do the straight thing, v'azanta lemitzvotav, and you listen to the mitzvot, v'shamata kol chukav, and you keep all the laws of the Torah, kol ha'machala shesamte b'mitzrayim lo asim alecha. I will not, in the future tense, apply any of the sicknesses I gave to Egypt. Ki ani Hashem rofecha. I am Hashem, your physician, but I am a preventative physician, not a curative physician, or not only a curative physician. I help you prevent illness. I don't help you cure illness. Yiddishkeit, the reason to come to Yiddishkeit, the reason to come to the Torah, the reason to go to shul, the reason to say Tehillim, the reason to learn Torah is not because we're in a desperate situation. Yes, right now we are in a desperate situation, and of course we'll do those things. But when the desperate situation passes, and we're busy, and we're in our businesses, and we're thinking, and we're cycling, and we're running, and we're going to the gym, and we're not finding time there, that's when we need to be going. That's the time that we go to apply ourselves to Hashem. זה המאמר הראשון על המשמעות והכוח של מצוות השם. אם תמסור את כל חייך כדי לחיים את כל תורת השם. If you give your entire life, the fullness of your life, the brilliance and vitality of your life to the service of Hashem's Torah, הרי תורה זו תהי רפואה מונעת לכל הסיבה הגופני והחברתי. Then the Torah will prevent you from all sorts of physical, mental, emotional, and social illness. It's for prevention. The time to learn Torah is when we're fit and when we're healthy, not when we're sick and when we're suffering. And therefore, that being the case, he wants the person who serves at the Beis Hamikdash has to be somebody who represents that. You want the Kohen who's standing up there to be somebody who is fit and with full stature and vital and strong, that people look at him and realize this Kohen who could do anything, this Kohen could be a football player, this Kohen could be an athlete, this Kohen could be a big businessman and entrepreneur, and he's chosen to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. That's what he wants us to see, and that's the same today. We want people to see successful people applying themselves to Torah. Of course, not to suggest that people who are having difficult times and who are not going through a successful period don't have a place in Torah. Of course they do, but not to the exclusion of those who fit and doing well. And that's the meaning of this law, that the Torah wants the Kohen to be a particularly healthy individual, to be able to portray that image of the purpose of the Beis HaMikdash is to attract the fullness of life, the vitality of life, and not just the broken pieces of life, is what he wants to portray. Let's go a little bit further, and then we'll take some discussion. Back to the Gemara. The Gemara is not satisfied yet, so let's go back to the Gemara here. So we've done this piece here where it says, it's briti shalom kshu shalem v'lo kshu chaser. This brit shalom, which Hashem talks about in respect of Pinchas, is an idea of shalem, of completion. Ask the Gemara, but it doesn't say that. It doesn't say shalem. Shalom kativ. If you look in the Torah, it says shalom. It doesn't say shalem. It doesn't say hineni noten lo et briti shalem. It says hineni noten lo et briti shalom. That's a different word. Amar Rav Nachman vav de shalom ketiahi. If you look carefully in the Torah, you will see that the vav has a break in it. It's not a complete vav. And that means that we can read this word two ways. We can read it with the vav and without the vav. I'm giving you my brit shalom, my covenant of peace, but I'm giving it to somebody who is shalem, to somebody who's whole, and not to somebody who is chaser, not to somebody who's missing parts of their body. Let's go back to Rav Hirsch, and then we'll do the Netzivin of Alojin. The Rav Hirsch talks about this broken vav, and he says because Pinchas's job, now listen to this carefully, because this applies to today, not even to yesterday or to a week ago. This applies to where we are in the world right now. And it's interesting how so often when we learn, what we learn on that day has a message for us for that day. And what let's have a look at this. He says Pinchas's job was not to kill Zimri and Cosby. That was part of his job. But his real job, sheken brit Pinchas hi hashalom, shehuchzar l'shleimuto. Pinchas's real job is to restore the peace he shattered. He went and murdered two people. He killed two people, and brought a lot of issues and broke the peace. He didn't create the peace. He didn't say, "Not my business." What Zimri does, I don't want to intervene. I don't want to get involved. Who am I to get involved? He took the law into his own hands and he acted and shattered the peace. His job doesn't stop there. And it's not for Pinchas now to say, "Fine, so I've done my bit. I've shattered the peace. I've killed Zimri. I've stopped the Magefah. This plague has been sorted out. My job is now done." That's not good enough. His job only now really begins, because his job is to restore the peace that he himself shattered. When there's a need for Pinchas's anger, the peace is nikta. It's broken. That vav is broken. Pinchas has to restore that broken vav. So when you're reading in the Torah, when the Baal Koreh reaches that part, and he says, "Hineni noten lo et briti shalom," and he notices a broken vav. There's a broken vav because there's a shattered peace, and there's a need to restore that peace, and that's the brit shalom. Pinchas, I expect you to restore that shalom. Hu nilcham al she'ashalom yashuv liyot shalem. His battle is to restore the peace to shalem, to complete. And that's where we learn this law that the Kohen himself has to be shalem, because it says Hirsch in that bolded piece, "Harotzeh lahavi lidei kach she'ashalom shenikta yachzor letikuno." A person who wants to play that role in society, to restore the shattered peace to wholeness, Hino atzmo chayav liyot shalem. He has to be shalem. Only a person who is himself whole of character, only a person of integrity and wholeness can pull that off. It's relatively easy to shatter the peace. To shoot Zimri, that takes a moment. But to be able to restore the peace, that's something that's much harder. And in the situation that we are now, where there's a need to go in and to do what we have to do, nobody wants to do this. No Jewish person wants to kill anybody. Nobody wants a war. Nobody wants to bomb people, innocent or not innocent. It doesn't make a difference. It's not something we want to be doing, but it has to be done. There's a time when it has to be done. But that's not where our job finishes. Everybody's talking about the purpose of this thing is to get rid of Hamas, to destroy Hamas, and make sure they can never do it again. No, that's step one. Step two is to restore the country to a level of peace it didn't have before. Long before last Shabbat, we didn't have peace. The problems weren't coming from Gaza over the fence. The problems were coming in our own town squares. We had the problems within our own societies. And what we've got to do after this is all over, we've got to make sure that the nation is returned to its shleimut. Our purpose is not just to get rid of Hamas. Our purpose is to get rid of the Pirud. Our purpose is to get rid of that which tore us apart. And we needed Hamas on Simchat Torah to bring the nation together again. That's disgraceful that we needed that. But it happened. And we are together and we are united. What happens after the job is done? What happens after Hamas is gone? What do we do with the shleimut of Am Yisrael? That's where our leaders should be thinking. That's what we should all be thinking about. How are we going to restore that peace? The Brit Shalom that has to come after there's been a shattering of the peace. And the Netziv in the Hamek Davar in that last part says on the Shalom Ketiyah, the fact that the word Shalom is broken. Because sometimes too much peace is a problem as well. And Pinchas himself, who lived a very, very long time, as you know, and in the time of the Shoftim, he's still around, and doesn't get angry with the pesel of Micha, with the statue, with the idol of Micha. He's too careful to keep the peace. And he takes the view, I was given Brit Shalom, my role is to keep the peace. No, says the Netziv, your role is to do with Micha exactly the same as you did with Zimri. There are times when peace is not the right response. There are times when peace does have to be shattered. As long as we know that when we shatter peace, we're going to have to rebuild the wholeness. That our job is sometimes to step in and to fight. Our job is sometimes to step in and take a stand and say something, express an opinion, which is going to cause conflict, which is going to cause dissension among people. Sometimes we have to do that, but our job doesn't stop there. When we've done that, we have to find within ourselves the ability to bring that back together and to be able to recreate the shleimut that was before, and in our case, it wasn't even before. We've got to look at creating a shleimut that we lacked before and to find a way to bring that together. So let me pause there. This is an example of taking two lines of Gemara and through understanding the Gemara well, going through the Psukim, understanding the Gemara with Rashi. Today we didn't have Rishonim, we didn't have Tosfot or other Rishonim. We went straight into the Achronim. We went straight to the 19th century. But in learning these three amazing authorities, the Maharil Diskin and Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch and the Netziv, and understanding them, we just get this unbelievable message. Yes, Shalom is Hashem's signature. It's what Hashem stands for. Shalom is one of Hashem's names. It's something we believe in. But there are times where you've got to diminish the peace because a job has to be done. And we are in such a time now. But we need to understand our responsibility coming from Pinchas to rebuild the shleimut, to rebuild the shattered shrapnels of peace, to take them, build them, and put them together again until they become shalem. And we need to be careful that in this time where we have a certain unity of focus, thank God, that we don't allow our anger to descend into hatred. and that we don't allow our needs to fight a war to result in any kind of negative environment afterwards. On the contrary, we need to be applying our minds already to what are we going to do to rebuild the country and rebuild the people and rebuild the nation in a way that was far better than it was before. And for that, we need people of character. As Rav Hirsch says, we need people who are themselves shlemim in order to be able to create a society that is shalem. This can't be done by corrupt politicians. I'm not talking at any politician in particular. I'm not talking about anybody in particular. I think we're blessed with a choice of corrupt politicians, as most countries are. And that's just part of the nature of politics. It attracts corruption. But that's not going to get this right. Politicians aren't going to be able to solve this. It's going to need shlemim. It's going to need people who have fullness of character to be able to bring this around. So, Rav Atlas, we've given you a job of work to do now, and you can get busy and lead us in that direction.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbi Lapin, for a very interesting shiur, fascinating shiur, and a very important message, culminating with that very important message. We will now go on a short break for 5 minutes, and exactly at 10:45, I will begin the next shiur. Thank you very, very much.
A question from Fred there. Can we take a question?
Sure, absolutely. Any questions? We have time, yes.
Can you unmute, Fred?
Oh, just a minute. Who wants me to unmute them? If you'll raise your hand, I'll see who it is. Oh, Fred, yes, just a minute.
Okay, you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to suggest that the question of the Gemara, where do we know that a Baal Mum's avoda is pasul, and they quote the pasuk having to do with the makriv carbon. However, there are parts of the avoda that do not pertain to a carbon, for example, Trumas Hadeshin. So maybe the answer to that is that even Trumas Hadeshin, which is not part of the Torah avoda, is also pasul, and that's why the Gemara's question is a good one. It's not a silly one. The way it was presented, that the pasuk answers it all.
So it's interesting, and I'm not sure particularly with Trumas Hadeshin, but there are other things that the Kohen with a mum is allowed to do.
Right.
He's certainly allowed to be on the Beis Hamikdash. He's certainly allowed to be there. He's allowed to be present, and as we saw, he's certainly allowed to eat from the korbanot. But you're right. The question is there are some things that he's not allowed to do. The question is why. It might not be specific in the psukim, but particularly as Rashi learns it, what the Gemara is concerned about is why would it be retrospectively? If he knew he was doing something wrong, I get it. But if he had no idea that he was doing anything wrong in the first place, why would that disqualify his retrospective activities on the Beis Hamikdash? Is the way Rashi learns it, but your point is great.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Look forward to seeing you again next time.
I have just a technical question. If I looked at a Sefer Torah and I actually looked at the pasuk, would I actually see a space in that vav?
I see Rabbi Lapin has left us, so I'll answer you. No, you wouldn't see a space. It wouldn't. There will just not be that vav, and there wouldn't be even a space for it.
Well, how do you now know that? So I don't understand the drush then. If there's no space there, if that vav looks like every other vav in the Torah, then what is the basis of the drush?
There are words that could be written either with a vav or without a vav. And according to how they're written, then Chazal would understand it in different ways.
Well, I understand that, but the point made, the question was asked. I mean, after all, the word says shalom, it doesn't say shalem. So the answer that the Gemara gave is because the Vav had a space. Well, the Vav had a space, then there has to be a space. If there isn't a space, I don't understand the answer.
I'm not, that's a good question. We'll have to, we'll have to look into that. Rabbi Lapin is not here to answer, so I don't want to give an answer that might be the wrong answer, but good question.
Okay.
This minute,
Thank
Fred
you.
might want to answer.
It's a vav katia, which means there isn't a space. There's a vav that looks somewhat like a yud. It was cut off. It's shortened. So that's where there's a drush.
Well, then the question is that really true?
Yes, it
In
is.
other words, if I actually look at a Torah, at a Sefer Torah, can I see that that Vav is different than all other Vav?
I believe the answer is yes.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. I'm just asking the question.
Okay, it's time for the next shiur, so I'll mute everyone and we'll start with the next shiur. I'll share a screen with you before we begin. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'd like to also welcome my father-in-law, Rabbi Cardozo, who's with us as a listener this time, but Bezat Hashem, please God, as someone who will also give shiurim in this program as well from time to time. I need to move this aside just a minute. Okay, can you see the screen that I'm sharing? Okay. So basically what I will be doing during my shiurim is we will be seeing various halachic issues and trying to explore their historical background and understand them in that context. And sometimes you will see that certain halachot, the context changed, and maybe also the understanding of what they represent also may change throughout history. What I chose to do now is to discuss Hanukkah. Now, why Hanukkah? So, first of all, Hanukkah is around the corner. 2 months, 2 months from now is Hanukkah. That's the next. That's the next Chag. But who has a mind to think now about Hanukkah? We're just going through one of the most terrible times that we've experienced here in Eretz Israel. We just experienced this terrible tragedy. We're in the middle of a war, and who wants to think now about Hanukkah? But as you are going to see, what we are going to discuss today has a lot to do about our present situation. So I'm going to discuss Sukkot, which we just went through. I'm going to discuss Hanukkah, where we are heading, and I'm going to discuss a war that takes place between Sukkot and Hanukkah, where we are right now, and as we will see, is well attached, well connected to our history. So as the general text, which for this shiur, which I'm going to go through, is going to be the Tu. The Tu, or in its fuller name, Arba'at Turim, was written by Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, one of the great halachic scholars mainly in Spain, but in other areas as well, from 600 years ago, more or less. And based on the two, Rav Yosef Karo wrote his famous Beit Yosef, and the extract out of that what is known to us as the Shulchan Aruch. So in many ways, Arba'at Turim, the two, is the book which the Shulchan Aruch is based upon. And we will start to talk about Hilchot Chanukah as they appear in the two. So I'm starting here in the highlighted part of the source that is in front of you. Sorry, I highlighted beneath the highlighted area, not the highlighted area, beneath it. My Chanukah. Okay, this is the title. These are the highlighted areas, what is going to be discussed in this part of the two. And this is the two. Around the two, this is the Beit Yosef, which I'm not going to read inside, but I might discuss from time to time. So the first thing the two does is to quote the Gemara, which in itself is a quote of a Braita, of an earlier Tanaitic text. So the quote from the Gemara it's a Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, Daf Kaf Aleph Amud Bet, Mai Chanukah. What is Chanukah? So first of all, this is quite striking. You see that rabbis in Bavel are sitting at some time, maybe it was, I don't know when exactly it was, maybe 3rd, 4th century, asking what is Chanukah. Now, maybe they didn't know at all, maybe they had some idea, but not exactly, and meaning whoever asked, someone had an idea because an answer is given, but it wasn't necessarily common knowledge. And now an answer is brought, and the answer is brought in the form of a Braita, of a Tanaitic text that says like this. Now, this Tanaitic text is from Megillat Ta'anit. And I'm going to say a few words on Megillat Ta'anit once we read the text itself. So this is the text. Tanya, we were taught. What were we taught? The Chafhei Kislev, on the 25th of Kislev, Yomei Chanukah, are the days of Chanukah, Timnia Inun. 8, they are, Velo lemisped behon. On these days, we do not carry out eulogies. Udelo lemigzar behon ta'anita. And those who their job is to, from time to time, to announce a fast day during the days of Chavsal especially, but not only, also even nowadays from time to time, the religious authorities, or then it was the authorities per se, announce a Ta'anit, announce a day of fasting. Maybe there is not enough rain, maybe there is a great war or some other source of trouble or calamity, and we fast and we gather together in the town square and pray. So such a fast is not to be announced during the days of Chanukah. Now here is the right place to comment on the nature of Megillat Ta'anit. Megillat Ta'anit is an ancient text, very ancient text, even in Jewish terms. It is somewhat between the Tanakh and the Mishnah. Okay, the Mishnah is new relative to Megillat. Megillat Ta'anit is very ancient, and soon we will that in a sense it is treated as the books of the Tanakh. It is so ancient. Okay, but what is that book about? So its name is Megillat Ta'anit. In fact, it's a euphemism because Megillat Ta'anit means the Megillah, the book of the days of the Ta'anit. But in fact, what it is the days on which we are not supposed to have Ta'aniyot. We're not supposed to fast on these days. So it's basically a list of days, of dates, on which we're not supposed to have a Ta'anit. And one of these dates is the date of Chanukah. We just saw it. Okay, now the Baita continues. שכשנכנסו יוונים בהיכל, טימאו כל השמנים שבהיכל, וכשגברה יד מלכות בית חשמונאי וניצחום, בדקו ולא מצאו אלא פח אחד של שמן, שהיה חתום בחותמו של כהן גדול, ולא היה בו אלא כדי להדליק יום אחד, ונעשה בו נס, והדליקו בו 8 ימים. The great Hanukkah miracle, the miracle of Hanukkah, which we all know about. Okay, that is the explanation of Hanukkah. Now note, there is a difference between the first line and the explanation to that line. I'm sure you all noticed. מהי חנוכה? דתניא בכ"ה בכסלו יומי חנוכה תמני האינון דלא למספד בהון ודלא למגזר בהון תעניתא. What language was that in? That was in Aramaic. Then I continue, שכשנכנסו יוונים בהיכל טימאו כל השמנים שבהיכל וכשגברה יד מלכות בית חשמונאי. The story of Hanukkah. What language was that in? That was in Hebrew. Very close to the Hebrew of the Mishnah. The style of this Hebrew is the style of the Hebrew of the Mishnah, and is different to the first line, which is in Aramaic. And that is significant, and in a moment we will discuss its significance. But you know what? We will discuss it right now. We will discuss it right now. So what is the significance of this? So here we have the Khatam Sofer. Here, look here at source number 4. The Khatam Sofer tells us the following. Nir'eli, okay, so this he might have written somewhere in the 18th century. No, it could be in late 18th, early 19th century. Nir'eli kitrei Megillat Ta'anit Hava. There are 2 parts to Megillat Ta'anit. אחד, מה שכתבו חנניה בן חזקיה וסיעתו. Chazal ascribed Megillat Ta'anit to Hananiah ben Chizkiah and his people. So Hananiah ben Chizkiah lived quite early during the Second Temple days, and he and his people are responsible for the compiling and editing of Megillat Ta'anit. Now there are later dates to that are in Megillat Ta'anit, which were probably later added to Megillat Ta'anit. Again, Megillat Ta'anit is a list of dates on which sad things do not happen. Why? Because it's a list of dates of happy events that happen, and therefore we do not mourn or fast on those dates. And that was compiled quite early during Second Temple days, and later on maybe other dates were added as well. Ve'oto, says the Khatam Sofer, היה מקובל אצל חז"ל כאין ספרי המקרא. That was like the books of the Tanakh for Chazal. It was very authoritative, was seen as very ancient, and therefore it wasn't seen as something that someone can dispute. Ve'amru alav, and that's why we could find from time to time in the Talmud, diktiv b'Megillat Ta'anit. It is written in Megillat Ta'anit. Also note the name, Megillat Ta'anit. Megillah is what books were called Megillot, scrolls, because the ancient books were all scrolls. And so what we call today Sefer is that document. When in ancient Hebrew a document is referred to, then it's called Sefer. For instance, what a husband gives his wife when he divorces her, a get, is called Sefer Kritut, a document of divorce, a bill of divorce. So a Sefer was called a Megillah, and this is what it was. That was the one part of Megillah Tanit. Omnam, continues the Chatan Sofer, עוד אחרת הייתה מדורות שאחריהם, שהיה כאין ברייתא מסודרת לפרש מקראי מגילת תענית הנ"ל, ועליה נאמר תניא במגילת תענית. Now, it was that part, the hardcore of Megillat Ta'anit was like Sifrei HaMikra, and on top of that, there was another part which was a sort of commentary that would explain those dates. ועל אותן ברייתות אפשר שיחלוקתן עליהם, כי יאמר שלא כיוון המסדר האמת בכוונת הקרא של מגילת תענית. The dates themselves are non-disputable. No one disputes the dates. The dates in Megillat Ta'anit are fixed. It's like one of the books of the Tanakh. But the explanations are later, says the Chatam Sofer. And therefore, we sometimes will find that there is disagreement as to the dates, when exactly something happened. Okay, now the question is, so now I want to go back to what we read and note that there was the Aramaic part and the Hebrew part. The Aramaic part is the hardcore, is the original. The Hebrew part, which is Mishnaic Hebrew, that's the later part. That is the explanation. So we have the date of Hanukkah, 8 days. And then we have, what is the explanation? The explanation is the miracle of Hanukkah. It appears in the Gemara, quote from the Braita of Megillat Ta'anit, not the hardcore of Megillat Ta'anit, and now brought here in the two. But as the Chatam Sofer mentioned, there might be disputes as regard to the explanations. And indeed, today we have a few manuscripts or a few Megillot Ta'anit, and in fact, researchers trace back the different Megillot Ta'anit that we have to two basic Megillot Ta'anit. There were two explanations to Megillot Ta'anit, the one which we saw in the Gemara, and here, source number 3, I want to see another comment. So the first part is the hardcore, the same as in the Gemara, the same as in the tool, the same as what we saw before. Okay, so that is the hardcore. Now, ask the explanation. And here we will find a different explanation. So already, we have here an assumption. The question here is phrased differently. Here, the question is not why do we celebrate 8 days? We know why we're celebrating. We're celebrating Hanukkah. Hanukkah of what? Hanukkah means dedication, the dedication of the Mikdash. Okay, dedication of the Mikdash, says this Tana, is a 7-day dedication. That is what we find in the Moshe doing in the tabernacle in the Mikdash. ועלו חנוכה שעשה משה במדבר לא עשה אלא 7 ימים. וכן מציב בחנוכה שעשה שלמה שלא עשה אלא 7 ימים. Also the Hanukkah of King Solomon of the first temple was 7 days. מה ראו לעשות חנוכה זו 8 ימים. Therefore, why is it that this Chanukah is 8 days and not 7? What is the answer? Ela, rather, Bimei Malchut Yavan nichnesu bnei Chashmonai la'ichad. At the days of Yavan, the sons of Chashmonai came into the Beit HaMikdash after a long battle. And this is very important to understand. They came into Beit HaMikdash while the war was still going on. Yehuda Maccabi is going to die months later. So the war battles are still, so they're coming, the soldiers are coming, they just conquered Jerusalem, they just conquered Beit HaMikdash, and even now, on Hanukkah, the Chakra, the citadel above the Beit HaMikdash is still in Hellenistic hands. So we didn't win victory yet. Hanukkah, we are not celebrating our victory, we're celebrating the dedication, the rededication of Beit HaMikdash. Beit HaMikdash during the days before Hanukkah was captured by Hellenists and Hellenized Jews who basically turned it into a temple for Zeus and the Hellenistic pantheon. And now the Chashmonaim and the devout Jews recapture Beit HaMikdash and they rededicate it. But now the question is, why 7 days, not 8 days? So what does the Tana tell us? Uvanu et HaMizbeach, they rebuilt the Mizbeach, and this we know from other sources. There was a Mizbeach there already. The original Mizbeach was there. But since it was used for Avodah Zarah, they took it apart and buried stones and rebuilt the new Mizbeach and made it nice and square, Sadu Basid, V'tiknu bo klei sharet, and made all the utensils and vessels that would be needed to serve on the Mizbeach. And how long did all that take? That was the story. To build the Mizbeach, to erect the new Mizbeach, took 8 days. That's why we celebrate 8 days. So usually the dedication would be 7 days. The 7 days of dedication, that's when everything is already built. But we came in, nothing was built. We had to rebuild the Mizbeach, and that took us 8 days. So now the question is a different question. Just a minute. If we are celebrating the dedication of the Mizbeach, the building of the Mizbeach, not candles that we need to light, it is a barbecue that we need to do. So the mitzvah on Hanukkah should be to have a barbecue for 8 days. But that's not the mitzvah. We light candles. Why? So the Tana goes on. Why is it that we light candles? Ela, rather, בימי מלכות יוון שנכנסו בית חשמונאי להיכל, 7 שיפוטים של ברזל בידם וחיפום בעץ והדליקו בהם את המנורה. They came in with 7 spears of iron and they covered it with wood and lit the menorah with it. And to remember that, we light the candles. Okay, and then the Megillah goes on to we say Hallel. We won't get into that. But now my question is, you just explained that the 8 days has to do with the Mizbeach, with the altar. You just said that that was the main thing. And then you said, but we do candles because they stuck 7 spears in the ground because they didn't have a menorah. First of all, okay, they didn't have a menorah, so build a menorah. Build a new menorah. Let it take whatever it takes. The altar took 8 days. The menorah would take maybe another 8 days or whatever. But why couldn't you wait to have a menorah? Why you immediately put spears in the ground and lit them? And why the celebrating is dafka that? After all, we could celebrate the altar as well, but we chose to celebrate, of all things, the lighting of the Chanukiah, of the menorah. What is so important in the menorah? Now, this question I could also ask on the other version. And I'm asking them on both versions, meaning the version of this story, of this reason of Hanukkah, and the version of the miracle. I'm asking it at both. Also the version of the miracle. Why was the miracle done with the candles? I mean, also they came in and they didn't have a mizbeach. So God could have done a miracle that there will be a mizbeach there. It took them 8 days to build a mizbeach. Why not make a miracle that they'll have a mizbeach on the first day? They had a mizbeach that would be ready only in the 8th day, and it was ready already on the first day. No, the miracle was with the oil and the menorah. What is so important with the menorah that the miracle was there? So according to both versions, my question is, why the menorah? Why the menorah is so important that God had to make the miracle there? That's according to the first version. Why is the menorah so important that when the Hashmonaim came in, they couldn't wait for a menorah to be erected, and they immediately put these spears in the ground and lit them without waiting. And it was so important that now that is what we celebrate, the lighting of these spears. What's so important about that? In other words, what is so important in the menorah that is what we celebrate? That is the question. Before we move on, I want to bring a third version as to why Hanukkah is 8 days. So we just had two explanations why Hanukkah is 8 days and why it is lit with candles. So the first version was the great miracle that we all know. Okay. The second version was the one we just saw. That those were the days it took them to build the Mizbeach, and it's candles because they put those spears in the ground. There's a third version, and that is in Maccabees 2. So there are two books of Maccabees. I read in English because we do not have the Hebrew original. It is not even clear that the original was written in Hebrew. It could be that the original was in Aramaic. It could be that the original was even in Greek. It's not clear what it was written in. So there is Sefer Maccabim in Hebrew today, but it's not the original. It is a translation from the Greek. So I thought if I bring already a translation, since the shiur was in English, I'll bring the English already. I don't need to bring a Hebrew translation. I'll bring the English translation. So this is a letter. I'm not going to read it inside, but we could see this. The Kohanim from Jerusalem are writing here to the Kohanim of Mikdash Chonyo in Egypt that they should celebrate what? The Chag of Tabernacles, of Sukkot, on the 25th of Kislev. Why? Because during Tishrei, they were at war. They weren't able to celebrate Sukkot. So they're going to celebrate it this year on the 25th of Tishrei. And that is why 8 days, because 7 days of Sukkot, and then Shmini Atzeret. So that gives a very strong connection between Hanukkah and Sukkot that we are going to further explore in a moment. But what we have here until now, we have 3 versions, or 3 reasons, 3 possible reasons why Hanukkah is 8 days. So we have the story of the miracle that the Gemara brings, an explanation on Megillat Tanit. Then we have the second explanation, Megillat Tanit, which was the building of the Mizbeach. And now we have a third story altogether, that it is actually the celebration of Sukkot. Now, the fact that it's the celebration of Sukkot explains that 8 days, it doesn't necessarily explain why lighting candles. But that is what we have. Okay. Now I want to move on and continue reading in the tool. Just a minute. So says the tool here, I'm reading here in the middle, V'yan, and because, Ki era nes b'nerot, since the miracle happened with candles, tiknu להדליק נרות בכל לילה כדי להזכיר הנס, in order to remind the miracle. וצריך כל אדם להיזהר בהם מאוד, ואפילו אני המתפרנס מן הצדקה, שואל המוכר כסותו ולוקח שמן להדליקן. Even a poor person that has nothing of himself, and all that he has from tzedakah, he has to do everything. He has to borrow. He has to even sell the shirt off his back to buy oil to light Hanukkah candles. Okay, very important mitzvah. Now, this idea of afilu ani shebiYisrael reminds us of another chag. So I spoke before about the connection between Hanukkah and Sukkot. Here we might find a connection between Hanukkah and Pesach. And here this is what the Beit Yosef says. כן כתב הרמב"ם, וכתב הרב המגיד, דהיינו מדתנן בפרק ערבי פסחים, שאפילו אני בישראל על יפחתו לו מארבעה אל יין. The same way we have the halacha that even a poor person must drink the 4 cups of wine, so too we have halacha that even a poor person must light Hanukkah. So there is a connection there also between Hanukkah and Pesach. I don't have time to explore that, but I just wanted to point it out. Okay. I'm going to get to the point which I'm going to, we're not going to do everything I wanted to do because I need to get to the point. So here, halacha number hey is finally where one lights the Chanukiah. ומניחה על פתח הסמוך לרשות הרבים מבחוץ, אם הבית פתוח לרשות הרבים, מניחה על פתחו, ואם בחצר פתוח לרשות הרבים, מניחה על פתחה, ואם מודר בעלייה שאין לו פתח פתוח לרשות הרבים, מניחה בחלק הסמוך לרשות הרבים. Okay, this is where we light. There is a machloket. The two here takes side in a dispute. There is a dispute because the Gemara is not too clear. So there is a dispute between the earlier commentators on the Gemara, the Rishonim, particularly Rashi and Tosfot, where exactly we should light the menorah. So one has the house. The house is within a yard. So where do I light the menorah? Front of the house, next to the door of the house, or next to the gate to my yard. So Tosfot says next to the gate to your yard. Rashi says next to the door of your house. Why? Because you have a few homes in the same yard. So it's important that we know what house each menorah belongs to. Tosfot says no, it's important that we have Pirsumei Nisa, and therefore at the opening of the gate, it's next to the street, everyone should see it. Now, what's the machloket here? There are 2 axles to this mitzvah of Hanukkah. It surrounds 2 cores. The one core is Bait, Ner Ish Ubeito. The mitzvah is to light a candle for a home, for a family. The other core is Pirsumei Nisa. You want to, so the Bait is inside, Pirsumei Nisa is outside. Now the question is, there is tension between the Bait and the outside. The question is, what takes over where there is a conflict? So Tosfot says, the Pirsumei Nisa, the announcement towards the outside is more important. So put it at the opening of the gate, even at the detriment of the home, meaning because no one would know now what home this menorah belongs to because it's at the gate of a few homes. But Pirsumei Nisa is more important. The announcement towards outside is more important. Rashi says no. The importance that the home comes first. So it's more important that the few that see it will notice what home it belongs to rather than have it outside with more seeing it but not knowing what home it belongs to. Therefore, put it at the opening of the home, not of the yard. Here the tool tells us, like Rashi, that like Tosfot, that we put it at the opening of the yard, not the home. Now comes the most perplexing halacha. Halacha number Vav. Mitzvah lehanicha lemata me'asara tfachim. Okay. The best place to put the menorah, so the menorah is put at the door of the home or at the gate, at the entrance of my yard to the left. Okay. Now, however, you have a table, don't put it on top of the table because the table is higher than asarat tfachim. You have to put it nearly on the ground, lower than asarat tfachim. If you put it above, it's okay, but the best place is lower than asarat tfachim. Why? So this we learn from the Gemara. The Beit Yosef tells us about the Gemara. There is a Mishnah in Masechet Bava Kama. What happens if a camel carrying something combustible goes through the marketplace and his load touches a candle and is set on fire and the whole marketplace burns down? Who's responsible? Whoever whoever lit the candle or the owner of the camel? So says the Mishnah, it depends. If the candle was inside a shop and the load of the camel was so big that it went into the by the candle, it's the camel owner's fault. If the candle was outside and therefore it lit the load on the camel, it's the fault of whoever lit the candle. Okay, that makes sense? Makes sense. Then comes Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda says it depends. On Chanukah, if it was a Chanukah candle high, then we cannot blame the one who lit the Chanukah candle. People should know that on Chanukah there are candles outside. To this, Ravina comments in the name of Rava in the Gemara. He says, from here we learn that the Chanukah candle has to be lit under, beneath, lower than 10 tfachim. Why? Because if it could have been higher than 10 tfachim, we would have required whoever has a Chanukah candle to light it above what will normally be the height of a camel with its load, that it won't catch fire. And from the fact that we don't do it, that means to say that there is a requirement that a candle has to be less than 10 tfachim. Then there is a machloket. Not everyone agrees to this. There are those who disagree. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. But the bottom line is that here, the two rules, like Ravina, that we have to light the candle beneath 10 tfachim. The question is why? Why? So some Rishonim say that is because beneath 10 tfachim, it is noticeable that you are not lighting it for light. Because when you put a candle for light, you hang it high for the light to come down. If it is so low, or at least put it on the table. If it is so low, it's beneath the table, it doesn't help. It comes into your eyes and it doesn't really make any light. That's a possible answer, but I want to give another answer. And in order to give another answer, yes, we opened with. Why with, and now, why candles? Why the menorah? What was so great about the menorah? What was so great with the menorah was the following thing. The battle of the Maccabim came after centuries of Jews not fighting. Since the end of the first temple until the days of Hanukkah, for nearly half a millennia, 400 years, Jews didn't pick up a sword. They came and built Beit HaMikdash with the permission of the king of Paras from Cyrus, from Koresh. Then later on, when Alexander defeated the Persians, the Hellenists were very kind, granted the Jews with whatever it is that they needed. They had their own autonomy. They didn't have to fight for their freedom. They didn't have to fight for religious autonomy. They didn't have to fight for anything. Jews governed themselves without having to fight. So the first time Jews pick up the sword since the late days of the first temple is during Hanukkah. And we must remember that one of the last Nevi'im was Zechariah. And what is his Nevuah? The Nevuah of Zechariah is in one of his prophecies, he sees a menorah, and Hashem explains to him what the menorah means. The menorah means, Lo b'chayil velo b'chosen amar Hashem, ki im beruchi amar Hashem. Your victory is not going to be won through force, through might, but only through God's Spirit. That was 400 years ago, the Nevuah of Zechariah. And indeed, the Nevuah became true, because what Am Yisrael achieved since was not with might and not with force, but with God's Spirit. Now, all of a sudden comes the days of the Hashmonaim, and they are forced to pick up the sword. And what happened now to the Nevuah of Zechariah? All of a sudden, Ken b'chayil, Ken b'chosen? What happened? Where's God's Spirit? And the Hashmonaim are very worried. And they come into the temple and they're trembling. And this is why Hanukkah is celebrated much before the victory, because it is not the victory which we are celebrating. We're celebrating something else. What is it that we're celebrating? Something that was a cure to the greatest fears of the Hashmonaim. And that is that either Hashem left them or that Hashem is not happy with what they are doing. Because they're not supposed to fight. Lo b'chayil velo b'chosen. Where's Hashem's Spirit? Did Hashem leave us? There is no Hashem's Spirit. And they come into the temple and there is this nest with the menorah. And then they knew Hashem didn't leave us. Hashem is still with us. For whatever reasons, we have to fight now, but God's Spirit is with us because we see it in the menorah. Or the other version, they knew that they must bring God's Spirit into this world. And they knew that it is up to them because they now fought and they now had might, and they brought the sword and they brought the might and they brought everything in order to win the enemies. And they might now turn into basically, people who get everything with force, who don't care of the Spirit. And that's why it was so important to them to bring in those spears. They came in and immediately they said, we must light the menorah. We must light God's Spirit, because without it, all of our fighting means nothing. And they come in and there's no menorah. So what are they going to do? Immediately they put the spears in the ground to light that menorah in order to say, well, yes, there is no menorah, but it's so important to us that we're lighting the menorah right now. So whether it was this way or that way, the menorah is very important because that symbolizes God's Spirit, and it brought in God's Spirit into an era where it seemed that it is not there. And that is why it was so important, and that is why throughout the generations we continue to light those menorot, those Chanukiot, to remember God's Spirit. And then comes the halacha, we light it under 10 tefachim. Why under 10 tefachim? In Sukkah, we also have this idea of 10 tefachim. Sukkah must be higher, must be minimum of 10 tefachim. Why? One of the reasons the Gemara gives, it brings Rabbi Yossi, who says, Me'olam lo ala Moshe lemarom, velo yarda shechina al har Sinai. And the Torah says, but it says that it did happen, these things. How could you say they didn't? So he says, no. Moshe went, ascended, but less than 10 tefachim. God came down, but above 10 tefachim. Meaning, God, there is this so to speak, space for God, and there is the human space, and they touch each other, but not go into each other's space. And that all happens in the height of Asarat Tfachim. Now, the question is, the Nerot of Hanukkah, where do they belong? Do they belong Lemala Asarat Tfachim, to God's realm, or Lemata Asarat Tfachim, to the human realm? Our victory on Hanukkah happened because people fought. It was the human spirit that fought. However, we brought the Nerot, we brought the godly spirit into the human realm. That is the whole miracle of Hanukkah. That is the story of Hanukkah. The story of Hanukkah is that for the first time, after many years, where we had everything that came to us without fighting, we now had to fight. Human beings had to fight, but we brought in God's spirit into that fighting. So we brought in the menorah, we brought in the candles, but it has to be brought to below Asarat Tfachim. Now today, we see what is happening. The most terrible things had happened to us. The tragedy from last week is the most terrible tragedy since the Holocaust, basically, that happened to the Jewish people. But that tragedy, after that happened, the spirit of the people and seeing the achdut and the togetherness in a sense that it never was this way before is so special. This is something that it is literally something historic. And it could be, if we compare ourselves to those days, we are forced to fight, but we have God's spirit with us. And that God's spirit must be brought beneath the 10 Tfachim into our realm, into the realm of human beings. And Be'ezrat Hashem, with that spirit, we will win victory. But as Rabbi Lapin said before, we would also be able to bring wholesomeness back to our own life as a nation, as an individuals, to live in peace with each other, Be'ezrat Hashem, after all this is over. So I think I took all my time, so we'll go straight into the next lesson of Rabbi Professor Jeffrey Wolf. Before I open Rabbi Professor Wolf's microphone, I want to just say thank you for agreeing to take part, to be part of this program. And Rabbi Professor Wolf was, I think is a professor emeritus now in Bar Ilan, right? It was before that in YU, studied in YU, and was also Talmid of Rav Soloveitchik, and involved in many initiatives in Israel. I don't have to tell you at all, because you could Google his name and you'll see everything that he's involved in, all the good things. Thank you very much for agreeing to be part of this initiative, Rabbi Professor Bevakasha.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Atlas. It is a pleasure and an honor. I am only sorry that I can't be there physically, and hopefully that will ameliorate. That situation will become ameliorated in the near future. I have to give, if we're mentioning my teachers, I have to give credit to the two who were responsible directly for what I'm about to present over the next number of weeks, and that is my major academic teacher, Professor Yitzhak Twersky at Harvard, and Professor Reuven Bonfield at the Hebrew University, who was my Rebbe in Italian Jewish studies. So you have to give credit where credit is due. Rabbi Atlas, if you can, is it possible for me to share screen?
Yes. You could
Thank
share.
you very much.
Yes.
Okay, I am going to put up the, hold on, let me do. It's not like I didn't teach like this for years, right? I'm a little bit out of practice. Hold on a second. Let's slideshow from the beginning. Okay. Can everybody see the PowerPoint? Okay, good. All right. We're going to be going a little bit away, a lot away from our troubles at the moment, and look at what is, in my opinion, one of the most fascinating, if not the most fascinating, Jewish community to ever exist. I recently told a friend of mine that my aim in life is to become an Ebreo Italiano honoris causa, an honorary Italian Jew. And I think as things go on, though, we'll find that we're not dealing in the antiquarian. We're not taking an antiquarian position, because many things that we will learn about Italian Jewry, first of all, have a direct impact on understanding where we come from, especially if you're Ashkenazi, but not just, and also the dynamic that took place in the interaction between Jewish and general culture, Jewish and Christian culture in Italy from the very beginning until today, really foreshadows a lot of the dynamics and a lot of the challenges that we face culturally as Jews in a broader world. Now, we live in a Jewish state, but there's no question, as we saw until relatively recently, until Hamas shook us out of our other crisis, that we are at the middle we're at the crossroads of a cultural conflicts which affect the entire world. And so we're not, we're part of that broader picture as well. And many of the issues and of the dynamics and of the responses and of the sort of creative interactions that we experience in our own lives were already foreshadowed and by Italian Jews, and some interesting answers are going to emerge, I think, from our discussions. Let me give you just an example. I'd like to start with, what's going on here? PowerPoint is not. No. Don't do that. Don't do that. All right, you have to excuse me. PowerPoint for some reason just crashed on me. I'm going to have to try it again. Okay, hold on. It's supposedly coming up again. Yes, here we are. Okay, come on. I'm not responding. Give me just 1 second. I'm very sorry. Let me just explain what I'm doing. The PowerPoint was actually on a separate disk, and I was reading off of that. And apparently, that's the problem. Give me half a second. I will fix that, and we will, and I think we'll be okay. In the meantime, let me while this is trying to load. The Jews of Italy, as we will soon see, Italian Jewry is the oldest European community in the world. I'm going to take Greece out of the equation for a moment and consider it part of the East for reasons which I hope will become clear later. Anybody have an idea when Jews first came to Italy? Oh, are you all muted? Is that what's going on?
Can unmute people. I could let's do it this way. I'll unmute everyone, but make sure individually that you are on mute when you're not talking. Okay,
because personally, I'm a big fan of participation. So
yes, that's why I'll do it, because I noticed also when I gave the share I felt quite lonely. I was talking and I couldn't really ask questions and get answers. So just a minute. I'll figure out how this is done. I think, yes. Okay, so now whoever wants to talk is able to unmute themselves. Just a minute.
I am really very sorry. I'm having a tremendous, all of a sudden, maybe things crashing. And I know we don't have a lot of time. I am really.
Oh, that's fine.
I am trying as we're speaking. All right, maybe it's not such a good idea. All right, so you know what, Rabbi Hanan, mute everybody, and we'll just except me, and I'll just talk.
Okay.
There's going to be background noise. Okay, so the Jews first arrived in Italy as part of the diplomatic mission that was sent by Yehuda Maccabi to the Roman Senate in the year 161. In other words, 2 years into the rebellion against Antiochus, Yehuda, who was not only a fine guerrilla warrior, he also had the gift of a very acute sense of diplomatic. He was gifted as diplomat as well, and he understood one of the first rules of diplomacy, and that is that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. As soon as this thing comes up, I will show you that at the time, Rome had just finished off, I should say, the Carthaginians. Carthage was, of course, located in North Africa. It was indeed its major rival in the Western Mediterranean. Scipio Africanus, for those of you who are aware of the names, had just beaten Hannibal. Hannibal had been killed. All the elephants had been sent back to Africa. And Carthage had been not only overturned and destroyed, it also had been plowed under with salt. Now, that was a Roman practice to show the utter destruction of an enemy. And you'll recall that one of the reasons why we fast on the 17th of Tammuz is because Nechresha Ha'ir, Yerushalayim was plowed under. That was another expression of this Roman practice of what do you do with conquered cities. So since the entire Western Mediterranean was now in Roman hands, the Romans started moving east. And they moved took over Greece, landed on the Peloponnesus, and laid their eyes on Asia Minor and the Seleucid Empire, which spread from Turkey of today all the way to Afghanistan. They were already putting pressure on Rome had already put tremendous pressure on Antiochus IV. We know, for example, that when Antiochus went to in fact, Rome, the relationship between Rome and the Seleucids and the Greeks and the Syrian Greeks had actually been an indirect cause for the Maccabean rebellion. At one point, Egypt, it's hard to believe, was am I speaking too quickly, or should I slow it down? Okay. Egypt was once the breadbasket of the world, sort of what Ukraine is today. And that's one of the reasons why there were shortages of wheat and other things in all kinds of parts of Europe because of the war there. Egypt was the breadbasket of the world. Antiochus, and it was especially the breadbasket of Rome, because there were a lot of agriculture was already in decline in Rome and in Italy. And the urban population in Rome was starving. That's why they bought off the Roman population. The rulers bought off the Roman population with panem et circenses, with bread and circuses. And Antiochus tried to overthrow the Ptolemies, who were ruling then in Egypt. The Romans sent a legate to Antiochus and said, "You get out of Egypt. We can't have you endanger our food supply." And Antiochus said no. So the Roman legate, according to the Roman legate, made a circle around Antiochus, and told him that you have until you can take all the time you want, but you have until you only have until the time till you leave this circle to I think we're doing okay. So you leave the circle in order to make up your mind, and he was forced to retreat because he knew he couldn't beat the Romans. So what ended up happening was the rumor had reached Yerushalayim that Antiochus had been not only been defeated by or been humiliated by the Romans, but he would died. And there were celebrations in the streets. Antiochus showed up and found out they were celebrating his putative death. So he looted the temple, and B, that was what caused him to issue his decrees against Judaism, because one of the radical Hellenists had told him, this is until as long as the Jews worship their one God, there's not going to be any kind of ability. There won't be any. We won't have any way to subdue them. All right, pray. Okay, let's see. Let's hope this works now. Yes. Okay. Forget what I said. We'll come back to that in a minute. I want to play for you two pieces, which I think by the same composer, which I think will beautifully illustrate the kind of issue that we're going to be dealing with, largely from a cultural religious point of view, when we talk about Italian Jewry. The name of the composer was Salomone Rossi. He was a composer and a performer in the magnificent, opulent. I can't even. There was so much money there that it's hard for me to, and luxury. It's hard for me to even describe it. In the court of the Gonzaga of Mantova, which were considered. I mean, anybody who wanted to learn about the Renaissance, at the time, went to the Gonzaga because they had all the art. They put Florence in their pockets when it came to Renaissance trends. And this Jewish guy who lived in the ghetto in Mantova at the second half of the 16th century, he was one of their composers. And this is a madrigal that he wrote. I'm not going to do the entire thing, but I want to give you a sense of what it was like, because I want to contrast it with another piece that he wrote to give you a sense of what was what part of the inner dynamic of Italian Jewry was. Here we go. Hold on. No. Boy, am I not doing well here. Okay, it's not playing. All right. I will have to. Let's try something else. Under Shlomo Min Ha'adumim, I'm very embarrassed by all this, but all right.
Maybe after the lesson, you'll be able to send it.
Yeah, all right, Beseder. You know what? We'll forget about that part. All right, so let's go back to where we were talking. This is a picture of the Roman Empire at 161 BCE. Okay, so you can see that they've already you look at the red on the right hand side where Turkey is today. You see that the Romans had already begun to make incursions on what had previously been Seleucid territory. And Yehuda realized that it's very smart. He'd be very smart if he made an alliance with the Romans, because obviously if the Romans would have put pressure on Asia Minor, they would have to move forces which could otherwise be used against him to meet the Roman threat. And so he sent a representation, a diplomatic mission to Rome, and the Roman Senate and the Jews of Judea reached the following treaty, which is recorded in the first book of Maccabees. And this is the copy of the epistle which the Senate wrote back again in tables of brass and sent to Jerusalem, that they might have by them a memorial of peace and confederacy. Good success be to the Romans and the people of the Jews, by sea and by land forever. The sword also an enemy be far from them. If there come first any war upon the Romans or any of their confederates throughout all their dominion, the people of the Jews should help them, as the time shall be appointed with all their heart. Neither shall give them anything that make war upon them, that you don't help their enemies, or aid them with victuals as food, weapons, money, or ships, or has seemed good unto the Romans. But they shall keep their covenants without taking anything therefore. In other words, this is free foreign aid. In the same manner also, if war come first upon the nation of the Jews, the Romans shall help them with all their heart, according at the time shall be appointed them, neither shall victuals be given to them, and so on and so forth, forever, forever, and ever. A treaty of mutual defense between Rome and the Jews of Judea. Well, we all know how that ended, not well. But I will tell you, sadly, that the Roman takeover of Judea, putting an end to Jewish independence in 63 BCE, was a result of this treaty, because there was a civil war going on between two brothers, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, the children of Alexander Yanai and Shlomtzion Alexandra, as to who should be the high priest and king of the Judean kingdom. They both invoked this mutual aid pact and asked Pompey, who was in Syria, to please intervene. Pompey intervened on behalf of Hyrcanus, who was the weaker of the two, and that was the end of that, because the Romans didn't help this one, they didn't help that one, they helped themselves. But in the meantime, this did help to take pressure off of Judah, and as a byproduct, this was the beginning, the official beginning of the Jewish community in Rome, because they set up a permanent diplomatic mission. So you can date the Jews in Rome. I'm sure there were business people who went to Rome before that, but you can date the Jews in Rome at least to 161 BCE. And what do you do? What did Jews do when they move to a town? They build a shul. So the earliest shuls that we know of in Rome, and they date from before the destruction of the temple, which is very significant. We'll see in a minute why. The earliest ones are apparently buried. If anybody been to Rome, you know you've been to the Tempio Maggiore, the great synagogue of Rome. On the other side of the Tiber, the area called Trastevere, which means the other side of the Tiber, is where the original area of settlement of the Jews was. And most archaeologists think that there are early synagogues there. However, within a half century of settlement of Jewish settlement in Rome, they moved to the city of Ostia. Ostia was once, it still exists, the city, but Ostia was once the port of Rome. And Jews moved there because that's where you do business. I mean, who moves to the biggest city in the world? Why do people move to New York? I mean, I ask myself, but anyway, why do people move to New York? They move to New York and want to make a living. And Jews were already in business, and they moved to Ostia and they built okay, please excuse me, an ostentatious synagogue on the site. We know that it was that the earliest shape of the synagogue. I forgot to put the BCE. It existed between 100 BCE and 400 CE. We see here, for example, on the right-hand side, a bas-relief from that synagogue, where you see on the left-hand side a lulav and esrog. You see a shofar, and more importantly, you see a menorah, which the menorah has, notice the base of the menorah. The base of the menorah has three legs. That is how the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash looked. The pediment that we know from the Arch of Titus, and now from the Seal of the State of Israel, was added. Professor Danny Sperber observes that it was added in order to make it easier for it to carry, because they didn't want the legs to break off. But the original menorah, all of the authentic pictures of the menorah have looked this way, and it is very likely that the person who did this inscription actually saw the menorah of the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. We have confirmation that that's how it looked from a stone that was found north of Tveria is the city of Migdal, or it's a kibbutz actually. On the Kinneret is the town of Magdala. It's where Mary Magdalene came from, and they uncovered a synagogue that we know existed from 100 to 67 CE. Josephus says the synagogue and the town were destroyed before the destruction of the temple, and they found there again one of these inscriptions showing the menorah exactly this way. So it's confirmation, first of all, that the synagogue was built by people who originated in Eretz Israel. A, B, very likely by people who actually seen the Beit HaMikdash, And number three, and this is really important for us to understand synagogues in general. The function of this kind of inscription was not just commemorative. The function of this kind of synagogue, and here I rely upon colleagues of mine in Jewish art history. The function was to emphasize the fact that when we say that a synagogue is a mikdash me'at, a lesser synagogue, it doesn't mean it's a replacement for the temple, which is the way many people understood it, but rather a portal to the temple. That the reality of a synagogue is derived from the Beit HaMikdash. This idea existed before the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. And I'm going to blow you away because this is not Drush, and this is not Hasidus, this is not Kabbalah. This is straight archaeology, history, and anthropology. So you'll say, what about synagogues today? The Eretz Yisrael tradition about their third temple is, and that's what's quoted by Rashi and by all of the other descendants of Eretz Israeli Jewry, as opposed to Babylonian and Sephardic Jewry. The tradition is that the third temple will not be built by man. It already exists and will come down and sort of like, descend from heaven, meaning that the third temple exists. Since that's the case, apparently the idea was that, yes, the temple has been destroyed, the physical temple has been destroyed, but there is another, you want to say a Platonic temple that exists, and all synagogues derive their reality and their sanctity from it. I know that sounds very drushy, but I what can I do? I published, this was one of my chidushim. It passed all the academic muster, so either all the academics are crazy, which is, it's possible. All the academics are crazy, or I'm crazy, but I'm convinced that this is the case. In fact, I blow you away with something just absolutely blew me away. One of the earlier Ashkenazi, and again, this equation of Eretz Yisrael, Italy, Ashkenaz is going to occupy us a lot in the early parts of our discussions. One of the earliest books that was published in the era of the Balei Tosafot in the 12th century is the Sefer Yereim by Rebbe Lezer of Metz. He was an early student of Rabbeinu Tam. And he lists all of the mitzvahs. He's got every say, and just like, just with all, Monei Mitzvot, all the mitzvah books, they're all the mitzvot related to the temple. There's only one mitzvah that's missing. He doesn't count the mitzvah to build the temple. He's got guarding the temple and watching the temple and taking care of the temple, sacrificing the sacrifice. Building the temple is not there. And I'm sitting there, what is this? I wasn't sure it would seem weird, right? So I have to give credit is due. So I dropped an email to my friend, the teacher and colleague, Rabbi Professor David Berger, who many of you may know as one of the world's expert in Jewish Christian polemic. I said, what do you make of this? He says, why not? Well, maybe he didn't think there was a mitzvah because God's going to do that. I mean, the temple exists and it's going to come down, so there's no mitzvah. Once we get it, we'll have to take care of it. But whatever. So in any case, there is certainly from this stone and from other similar things we find in other ancient synagogues, especially even those preceding the destruction of the temple, you see that there is this idea of our synagogue that we are building has a fundamental and unending connection to the temple in Jerusalem, whether it's the one on the ground or the one in heaven, and reinforcing this idea that the connection between Eretz Yisrael and the Jewish community of Rome. Here's a picture of the remains. By the way, if you're ever in Rome, it's a 40-minute drive and it's worth seeing. You can see the synagogue at its height on the left-hand side. It has two rooms basically. There is a major, there's the center room, which will remind you of the Shul Sisya or wherever. On the left-hand side, you'll see there's a door. The door leads to a side room where they used to keep the Aron Kodesh. The Aron Kodesh did not used to be installed in the wall. It was a portable box, which was brought out for purposes of prayer. The earliest built-in Aron Kodesh that we know of is in Kanatir and Kshatot in the Golan, again in a place which is really, the synagogue was practically reconstructed based on all of the remains that they found there, and I really highly recommend it, but that's not for now. So in other words, but you're talking also, by the way, by the 3rd and 4th century, talking about a community that can build a thing like this. So the community grows and grows and grows from this first diplomatic mission all the way till the 5th century. Over time, attracting, we'll talk about the slaves in a minute and the captives, but attracting also Jews who want to make a living. And there's constant traffic, we'll see, back and forth between the two areas. What do we know about the community? Well, we know that very early on, this increase in population became quite substantial. As soon as Rome became a place to show up, Jews showed up. This is best illustrated by the following story. In 63, as I told you, Pompey effectively came into Judea, used Hyrcanus as a figurehead, and put an end to made Judea a client state. Josephus has recorded. It's not in the name of Pompey, but in the name of Julius Caesar. But it really doesn't matter because we know that they would recycle these documents. The terms of Jewish surrender or submission to Roman rule. Interestingly, one of the first things on the list was that the half shekel, the machzita shekel, that every Jew is supposed to pay towards the budget of the Beit HaMikdash will be immune from seizure. It's really striking. That's one of the first things they asked. Now, that tells us a lot about the temple-centric, it's a terrible word, temple-centric kind of life the Jews lived. The Beit HaMikdash certainly was at the center of people's consciousness, but there's more than that. You have to understand that, and recent research has confirmed this. Tragically, even though Jews had begun to spread out throughout the entire Mediterranean littoral, the level of Jewish knowledge was abysmal. Much later, in the time of the Tanaim and let's say the 2nd century CE, the Yerushalmi says that Rabbi Meir found himself someplace in Asia Minor on Purim. He couldn't find a Megillah in Hebrew. He only found a Megillah in Greek. The reason why the Septuagint, which had been commissioned by Ptolemy Philadelphia in the 3rd century BCE, became the standard text of all Jews because they didn't know Hebrew. I want to call it the art scrollization of things. I won't object. In any event, so Jewish knowledge was really abysmal. We don't even know what the level of observance was, and in many far-flung places, it doesn't look to have been good. What they did have, and what maintained them, was giving the machzita shekel, because the half shekel was their connection to the temple, and the half shekel meant that they were active participants in the sacrificial service and in everything that went in the Beis HaMikdash, and that kept them alive spiritually, nationally, ethnically, and whatever you want. So that's why it was so important, not just because you needed money. There was always too much money in the temple budget, but because Jews needed this, because this was their their last connection. It's like Jews whose only connection with being Jewish is donating to UJA or Federation. They write the check. That check is very important. It's a statement of identity. It's not just, stum. So that's why that was one of the first terms. The same year, a ship bearing half shkalim in gold left Spain and arrived in Asia Minor. It arrived in a city which was ruled, or with the governor of which his name was was Lucius Valerius Flaccus. Flaccus wanted, one of the things you got to do when you were a governor of a Roman province or of an area was that you get to take money for the republic, and this is before the empire, and you take a percentage for yourself. So he sees that there's this ship coming from Spain with all this money from the Jews, and he says, okay, so he confiscated it. He sent a bunch of it to Rome, and he kept a few bucks for himself. I'm sure he kept more than a few bucks for himself because nobody knew how much money there was, so who's going to check it? This was an act of sacrilege, which horrified the Jews of Spain when the word got back. And they turned to their brethren in Rome. Now, notice this is like you're talking about Achdut Yisrael. They turned to the Jews of Rome, who were equally horrified, and they went to the Roman Republic, and they got a warrant for the arrest of Lucius Valerius Flaccus on charges of malfeasance, violation of treaty, and whatever else, embezzlement, whatever else. Flaccus wasn't an idiot. He got himself the best lawyer in Rome, whose name happened to be Marcus Tullius Cicero. Those of us who study Latin as kids know that the third year of Latin, that's who our torturer was. Because we all had to learn, usque tandem abutera Catalina patientia nostra. How long, O Cataline, will you abuse our patience? Because Ciceronian Latin is the most difficult, except for maybe Virgilian. But, that was the gold standard. Anyways, Cicero, who sort of saddled us with Ciceronian Latin, was the lawyer. He was known as a brilliant orator. And so he defended Flaccus. And in the context of that defense, he managed to invent some of the earliest anti-Semitic canards of which we have record. He said, the next thing is that charge about the Jewish gold, aureum Judaeorum. And this, forsooth, is the reason why this cause is pleaded in the steps of Aurelius as part of the old forum. It is on account of this charge, O Laelius, who is the judge, that this place and that mob, meaning the Jews, has been selected by you. You know how numerous that crowd is, how great is its unanimity. They all hang together. And of what weight it is in the popular assemblies. I will speak in a low voice, just so as to let the judges hear me. For men are not wanting would be glad to excite these people against me and against every eminent man. And I will not assist them and enable them to do what Jews keep together. They pull things, they have power, they can hurt me, and so on. But to resist this barbarous superstition, Judaism was considered a superstition, was an act of dignity. To despise the multitude of Jews, which at times was most unruly in the assemblies in defense of the interests of the Republic. They act against our interests. They are a seditious section. And then he talks on about how Jews love money. Okay. Flaccus, you can imagine, got off. But the point is that the Jews of Rome were apparently of sufficient number that Cicero could blow their influence out of proportion and use it as a way of getting Flaccus off. Jews in Rome apparently were not shy either about their religion. Now, we know that we're always told that Jews don't proselytize. Jews don't try to convert anybody. Now, that may well be today, but the Jews of Rome were very like their religion very, very much, and they wanted to share it with as many people as possible. I should also mention that this was a period in which the traditional religion of the Romans, Jupiter, Juno, all them, began to go into crisis and began to cease satisfying the spiritual needs of the populace. But in any case, under Tiberius, here's Tiberius on the right-hand side, Tacitus tells us there was a debate too about expelling the Egyptian and Jewish worship, because the Isis cults, the mystery cults of Egypt, were also very popular. And the resolution of the Senate was passed that 4,000 of the freedmen class were infected with these superstitions. Most of them we know were Jews, and were of military age, should be transported to the island of Sardinia to quell the brigandage of the place, a cheap sacrifice that they should die for the potential climate. The rest would quit Italy unless for a certain day they repudiated their impious rights. In other words, they drafted a whole bunch of the Jews. They sent them off to fight brigands in Sardinia, and says if they die in battle, good. The climate in Sardinia is crappy. They'll die from that. And the rest of them, we're kicking out of Italy unless they convert to our religion. Okay. And that's not all. And that's not all. Tiberius is the second emperor. After him comes Caligula. After Caligula comes Claudius. And after Claudius comes Nero. And but before we get to that, apparently the success of the Jews converting Roman pagans to Judaism, their success was not it was not just in the lower classes. Josephus tells us that there was a woman, a very upper class famous woman named Fulvia, who had converted. And it was one of the reasons why they caused them, he says, to be thrown out of Rome. And this is, by the way, this apparently is a picture of Josephus. I'm sorry, a bust of what Josephus actually looked like. The really amazing case. I mean, talk about unbelievable. Okay, Doug, you have to keep this to yourselves. Please don't tell anybody, because certainly don't tell your Christian friends what I'm about to tell you. All right? You're promising? I need to see hands, because I'm not going to take any chances over you. All right? Jews continued to continue to proselytize. Apparently, Claudius, who by the way had Jewish friends, expelled them from Rome. But this is the real cooling part. Josephus tells us that Nero's favorite wife, I mean, he murdered her later, but Nero's favorite wife, Poppaea, converted to Judaism. There was a case of a couple of Jews who were fighting. The case was brought before Nero. Poppaea intervened on her behalf, and Josephus tells us this. And when Nero had heard what they had to say, he not only forgave them what they'd already done, but also gave them to let the wall they had built stand. This was the problem between them. This was granted them in order to gratify Poppaea, Nero's wife, who was a religious woman, meaning in Josephus's terms, she was Jewish, and he requested these favors of Nero. Let that sink in. Okay. Now, in 64 CE, Nero decided to undertake an act of urban renewal by burning Rome, and tens of thousands of people died. But he wasn't going to take, here he is, playing violin or lyre. Therefore, so who did he blame? He blamed the Christians, who were a small sect at the time. This is 30 years after Jesus dies. But there's more than that. Anybody ever see the movie Quo Vadis? With, I think, Victor Mature is in it, and Peter Ustinov. It's all about Peter and the fire of Rome and the persecution of the Christians. One of the figures there is Poppaea, who tells Nero to blame the Christians for the fire, so he doesn't he won't have to get any blowback for what he did. That assertion is based on statements by Suetonius and Tacitus that it was Poppaea, in fact, who said to blame the Christians because Nero wanted to blame the Jews. In other words, and that's what I'm saying, keep this to yourselves. Poppaea, by being a Gioret, intervened on behalf of the Jews and managed to get Nero to persecute the Christians, which did not end up so well in human history either. But it gives you a sense about the prominence of the Jews in Rome at the time. Okay, we know later that Chazal came out very much against proselytization, but this is quite a community. The community itself, however, we know a lot about it. We know a lot about it from different places that were not to be not to be accepted. We don't know much about the community from Jewish sources from before the destruction of the temple, but from right after we have some very interesting indications. So first of all, for example, we have a Braita in Masechet Sanhedrin talking about what the major centers of Jewish study are. Tzedek tirdof. The Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Lamed Beis Amid Beis. Tzedek tirdof. You should pursue justice. Halacha char chachamim yeshiva. Don't just sit there at home. Go to centers. There were no major yeshivas. Yeshivas, the way that we know, did not exist for a very long time. Not until the time of the Gaonim. So, or at least maybe the end of the Amoraic period. Scholars would get together every so often in large numbers, but that was like an annual, plus the RCA convention or something. It wasn't a regular institution. You went and you studied in small groups with a major Talmud Chacham. I don't know, like the kibbutz of those who are familiar, like the little group of students that went and studied, the kibbutz who studied with Reb Chaim Ezer Grodzinski in Vilna, or they were like the 10 or 12 students who went to the Brisker Rav in Brisk, and so on and so forth. Anybody went to YU may remember Rabbi Gorelick Zecher Tzadik Livracha. He was part of that little get together. Anybody from Cincinnati who may have remembered Rabbi Silver, Reb Lazer Silver, he was part of the kibbutz of there's 4 or 5 students of Reb Chaim Ezer. Anyways, so you studied with one master, and then you went to another master and you wandered around. So what does the Mishnah, what does the Brisa say? Halacha char chachamim leishiva. Go study with individuals. Rabbi Eliezer Lelud, Acha Rabbi Yochanan Zakai LeBorachayil, Acha Rabbi Yoshua LePkiyin. That's of course when you go to that's what happens when I touch the what happened here? Okay, what happens when I bang on the table? What's going on here? I don't know why am I. It doesn't. Forget it. I can't get my thing back on. In any case, so. Okay, we're back. To Pekiyin, Achar Rabbi Gamliel Yavne, Achar Rabbi Akiva Bnei Brak. By the way, anybody know where the real Bnei Brak is? The real Bnei Brak is underneath Summit Misubin. Underneath the Chiriya, that's the real Bnei Brak. Anyway, so Bnei Brak, Achar Rabbi Matya Laromi. Rabbi Matya ben Cherish was mentioned in Pirkei Avot. He actually participated in the Bar Kokhba revolt, but it didn't seem to have hurt him at all. They sent him as a shliach chinuch to Rome to open up a yeshiva. So in other words, within a few years after the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Bar Kokhba revolt ends in 135. You have a center sufficient to be mentioned together with all the great Tanaim of the first and second generation of the Mishnah in Rome. Okay, well, how successful were they in educating the Italian Jews? From this we find out from Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says in Sanhedrin, this pops up in a number of different places. We know that there was constant back and forth traffic of the Tanaim between Eretz Yisrael and Rome for diplomatic reasons and all kinds of reasons. A lot of stories about various figures who traveled back and forth to Italy, but they always had a double mission. One mission was to do whatever they had to do with the government, and the other mission was to teach the local population, and they would wander around, meaning that we'll see in a minute, the education of the Jews of Italy was pegged to whatever was going on in Eretz Yisrael. And that only reinforces the intimate and inextricable connections, not just from a DNA point of view, a genetic point of view, an ethnic point of view, but also from point of view, culture and religion between Eretz Yisrael and Italy. So here we have the following story. Rebbe Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Gamliel, Salkun LeRoma. They all went up to Rome. Alun Lechad Atar. They went up to a certain place, apparently near Brindisium, which is where the major port was. They were playing in the sand. They had a bunch of kids playing in the sand. And they were saying to each other, look what they were playing. This is what they do in the land of Israel. Hahain Truma v'hahain Hamaiser. They were sitting there playing a big rub thing of sand, and they're being mafrish Trumot Masrot from the sand. That's their game. Which means, and now you don't take Trumot Masrot from Perot Chutzlaritz. I mean, certainly not as far as Italy. And they're doing this because they're acting out their what they're learning in Hebrew, what they're learning in school. Which means that the curriculum of the schools in southern Italy, which we'll see in a bit, was the center of had a much larger Jewish population, even that of Rome, was Palestinocentric, if you want. What they do here, we do here. We're preparing for. We live vicariously, if you want. So Amrin, so the rabbis looked at it and says, Mistabra de itacha Yehudaim. Apparently there are Jews in this immediate area because that's what these little kids are playing. The more, okay. There is one small indication of the profound impact of Torah Eretz Yisrael in Rome from an unexpected location. Now, I'm bringing this up because it comes from Pompeii. Pompeii was one big Club Med red light district in Italy. I can't in good conscience recommend to anybody who's Shomer Torah mitzvahs to go visit Pompeii, unless you avoid certain buildings which are really problematic. Nevertheless, one of the most startling proofs of the nature of Jewish life in the ancient period in Rome, Dafka, comes from Pompeii. This is a wall painting from one of the major buildings, which is called the doctor's house, because there were other indications from the house that the wall was occupied by a doctor. And art historians had a very hard time trying to figure out what was going on in this painting, because it's clearly on the right hand side. You can't see because I took it from a book. You can't see on the right hand side. You see there's a king, and on both sides are soldiers. The king is the guy holding up his spear. So all right, fine. But what's weird is when kings sit on thrones, anybody who sits next to him always sits on a lower level. If you remember the Ten Commandments, I know I'm pulling out movies, but if you remember the Ten Commandments, Seti used to sit in the middle, and Ramses and Nefertiri would sit next to him, but on a lower level. In El Cid, Ferdinand, the King of Castile, sits on a throne, and his two children sit a little bit lower. But here you have all three sitting on the same level. And why? And obviously, this king is passing judgment, and it's not 100% clear what's going on. About 10 years ago, 12 years ago, a colleague of mine, Professor Sarit Shalev Aini, published an interpretation which has then been accepted. It has fully been accepted by historians. Anybody want to guess? Open up and guess what this is. This is Mishpat Shlomo. This is the judgment of Solomon. Notice, there's a soldier on the left-hand side with a sword, and there's a baby on a table. There's a woman who is about to bend over who's holding the baby, ready for it to be split. There's a woman in front of the king pleading for it in a pleading connection. This is Mishpat Shlomo. Okay, so that's how we know that the doctor was Jewish. Okay, if he was a doctor, he probably was a dermatologist, considering what was going on in Pompeii. But anyways, so why does that? So why is that? So okay, it's very nice. Okay, so there was a Jew in Pompeii. There was a Jewish doctor in Pompeii. What does it help me? So Professor Shalev Aini argued, and I think she's absolutely right, that because now that we know that there's a doctor, that it was a Jew, we can understand what's going on the platform. This is not a court of a king. This is a Besdin. And there were three. The king is one of three Dayanim. This is one of three Dayanim, because the painter, or the person who commissioned the painting, knows that a Besdin is three people. This is the earliest material confirmation of the idea that a Besdin is made up of three people. Meaning that there is, and this is clear evidence of knowledge, awareness of the Torah Shebaal Peh in ancient Italy. Now, there's one wrinkle. because the Mishnah says explicitly, Hamelech lo don velo danimoto. The king is not a judge and is not, you don't judge him. Put that aside. There is no other way to understand the fact they're all on the same level, except to say it's a bezdin of three. So that, so qualitatively, we know a little bit about the fact that we had the connection between not just the Jews of Israel and the Jews of southern Italy and Rome, but also the quality and nature of their Judaism. Okay, let's keep going. Interestingly, there's another story which is really quite telling. We know a little bit about the relationship between those two centers, and the relation between the two centers, the community in Rome and the community in Eretz Israel, we know from the generation immediately after the Churban, after the destruction of the temple. The Tosefta in Beitza tells us the following story. The Tosefta in Beitza discusses how was it that after they would sacrifice the Korban Pesach, how did they prepare it? How was it cooked? So it has to be a gedi mekulas. A gedi mekulas, meaning it was had to be roasted. Had to be roasted. Hold on, again, I'm having trouble here. Had to be roasted. So the Tosefta says, Ezahu gedi mekulas. Kulot sli, has to be totally roasted. Rosho kra'av v'kirbo. The Gemara Torah says this has to be totally roasted inside outside, and you put these and you use a piece of pomegranate tree as a wood and as a spit. And okay, very nice. Amar Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta. Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta reported that toidos means God, thank God. It's Yedidya. It's Theodore. Toidos ish Romi. Kinhig et b'nei Romi. He ordained, he was apparently the head of the community, and he declared that all the Jews of Rome, likach tlaim b'leilei psachim, to take lambs on Pesach night, v'osimotan mekulasim, and to roast them exactly the way that the Jews in the time of the temple would roast the Pesach. Amrulo, somebody said to him, apparently the sages, you're going to confuse the Jews. They're going to think that they're eating real sacrifices in Chutz La'aretz because they called this meal that they would make in Rome psachim. What do you see from this story? We'll see the next passage also. What do we see from this? Number one, we see how profound the blow of the destruction of the temple was in the Jews of Rome. They felt they had to make it up somehow. Number two, we see here the origins dafka of the Sephardic custom to serve lamb at the Seder in memory of the Korban Pesach. I always say that this is a typical example of the difference between Sephardim and Ashkenazim. Sephardim will do anything to be able to do things as close as possible as what's supposed to be done. And the Ashkenazim will do anything possible to keep as far away from what must be done. You notice that there were those who argued now they would have to have pot roasted chicken on Seder night because it might look like you might think you're doing the korban. I mean, I don't know why people think that a chicken looks like a lamb, but that's another story. But in any case, this was obviously how intensely the Jews of Rome felt this way. And that Todos, this guy said, he's in charge. He says, you do it. And he was able to do it against the objections of the rabbis. The Yerushalmi expands on this to tell us a little bit more about this guy, Todos. Tani Amar Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi Yossi, the same Rabbi Yossi reports, Todos ish Romi hiniget Anshe Romi shayu ochlim gidim b'kolasim b'lei psachim shalchu chachamim. This is the background story, the same what we saw in the Tosefta. V'amrulo ilulei sha'at Todos. If you weren't such a big shot, if you weren't Todos, lo hayinu sha'at Todos lo hayinu menadidos. We would have put you in chayrim for doing what you do. Because it looks like they're really people. That's a substitute for the temple. Mao Todos. Why was he called Todos? Or who was he? What was the big deal? Why is he such a hot shot? Amar Rabbi Chananya dahava mashla parnasot d'Rabbanan. He was a very rich guy, and he paid for a lot of yeshivas. And he gave stipends. He was I don't know. He was what's the guy the yeshiva? What's the guy from L.A. who like bankrolls Lakewood? Whatever his name was, that doesn't matter. So he's a big shot. So he doesn't care what the rabbis say. I'm just being firmer than you. What's your problem? But you see, but what's important here is you see that at the same time as there's dependence, the community is dependent on, it has rabbis coming and they're learning, and there's also tension. You know, in Rome, the Italians saying, "Who are you to tell me what? We're sending you all the money, and what? don't tell me what to do." We have no indication whatsoever that Todos ever stopped. Doing that. Although the Roman Jews stopped after a while, imitating or recreating exactly what the Jews would do, what the Jews did in the temple. Okay, let's go on. Hold on. Why isn't this moving? Oh, odd. Second. Okay, let me start again. Current slide. Okay, so all right. Let me see here. I'm gonna have to reboot the. Okay, now we'll see what we can do. Okay, I'm having trouble again with the PowerPoint. What I will tell you is let me stop sharing. Okay. This connection between Eretz Israel and Rome, this connection between Eretz Israel and Italy continues unabated, even after the destruction of the temple, even after the fall of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire in the West ends or stops functioning in the year 476. Nevertheless, the Jews of Italy continued. There's something of a dark period after this, but they continue their connections, and these connections are reinstituted about 40 years after the destruction of after the fall of the Roman Empire in the West, because at that point Justinian reconquers southern Italy and makes it part of the Byzantine Empire. Now, at that juncture, the Jews of Italy are coming under. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, the Jews of Italy coming under Byzantine Rome rule have a couple of changes. Number one, they stop speaking Latin, or in addition to speaking Latin, they speak Greek. Now, this is going to be very important for us for a very simple reason. As we see already next time. By the way, Rabbi Atlas, how long do you want to go today?
That was a long time ago. But okay, we'll finish and
I can keep going for hours. Don't that's
okay. So it's we'll wrap up now and then continue.
Okay. So let me just say. So I'll leave you with this. One of the, as we'll see, not in this week's, not next week, but the week after, please God, the base population of Ashkenazic Jewry comes from these communities in southern Italy, and a lot of Yiddish words that we know and Latin words that we use in Yiddish even today come actually from Greek and Latin, and they are rooted in this community which is speaking Greek and Latin, and whose Hebrew for a long time was relatively schwach. So I'll give you a couple of examples you can take just for funsies. All right, one of the most well-known Rebbeim, Hasidic Rebbeim, I mean, unfortunately, tragically, he died in the Warsaw Ghetto, was the Piasetzner Rebbe. Okay, if anybody here comes from the island, I don't know where he is anymore, but Rabbi Moshe Weinberger, Wesley, or Eish Kodesh, what's the name of the show? Whatever it is. He teaches the Piasetzner Rebbe. And the Piasetzner Rebbe was Reb Kloinimus Kalmush Shapiro. Okay. What could be a more Yiddish name than Klonimus? Except it's Greek. Klonimus is Kale Nomos, Shem Tov. So you have a lot of people named Shem Tov ben Klonimus, just like, you know, it's typically Italian because Italian like to have names that are the same thing. So there was a famous Renaissance humanist named Fabio Biondo, which means blonde. So Shem Tov ben Klonimus and Shem Tov is all the same name. Okay, I'll give you another example. The name we say Rabbi Samuel Benson is for Benedicere. Benedicere means to bless. It's Latin. And so on and so forth. We'll talk more about it. We'll talk more about it next week. I hope I've intrigued you enough to continue. I apologize. I promise by next week I will have resolved the technical things, and maybe we'll even do it in person. Who knows? Okay. Meantime, Shia Tov. Netzach Yisrael lo mishaker.
Thank you very much for a fascinating talk. And thank you everyone who participated. And Bezod Hashem, we'll meet again next week, hopefully in person, but if not, then again on Zoom, and very soon in person, Bezod Hashem. So thank you very much, and nice seeing you all. Besorot tovot, Bezod Hashem.